almost all of the space on Earth is pretty much not really used. Let me explain. So, I was driving yesterday and I also am driving today, and as I was driving, basically just on the Autobahn in Germany, I just realized again that just Germany, for example, is almost completely empty. It's, I mean, it's just flat. Obviously, there are also a few mountains, but also the Alps in the south. But nevertheless, I mean, cities are basically the exception. We all live kind of in societies where we have where we know the neighbor, and where we maybe living in a city and where we meet people every single day. But as a matter of fact, if you really take a look at the world, I mean, most of the world is completely empty. It's obviously filled with nature, but it's just empty. It's not that the world exists out of cities. I mean, it's also kind of ridiculous if you think about it, that we as a human race are at this point in time where we basically, I mean, it's not that this is not pro-environmentalism or contra. It's just, I try to just make it observational. But, I mean, most of space on Earth is just completely empty. And also, it's completely flat, so we haven't even touched the possibility of building skyscrapers, like as housing projects, for example. I mean, in bigger cities, obviously there are already skyscrapers and also like 10 feet, not 10 feet, but 10 level, 10-story buildings or 20-story buildings. But it's not like most people live in buildings like these. If you also take a look at other countries, I mean, or continents, most of Russia is basically completely empty. I mean, Russia doesn't even have like a very high population compared to, or a very high population density compared to other countries. And for example, Germany has a very high population density, but nevertheless, Germany is kind of completely empty. And even within the big cities, if you take a look at Munich, if you take a look at Berlin, I mean, there are a few. Germany basically only has like a few skyscrapers, and that's it. That's it. Within Frankfurt you have a few, within Munich you have a few, maybe within Stuttgart, Leipzig, but it's not that these skyscrapers are actually buildings you can actually live in. These are just like office buildings. It's not that people actually live in skyscrapers most of the time. It's just in the very big cities, and it's something that's kind of very strange if you think about it. It's like we live in this world where we interact with other people all the time, but basically without the cities, there is basically just nature still. I mean, this is not about how much space humans use and whether that's something that's useful, whether it's something. This is not about the whole environmentalist discussion. It's just about that we, for example, if you take a look at any city, obviously this is, I guess, due to financial constraints, but I mean, we have basically housing problems in every big city, but nevertheless, we just don't consider building into the sky. Like, obviously, there is also the problem that you then have, the more you build into the sky or also into the ground. Why not just build into the ground? I mean, due to sunlight and due to us being still like, we still need the sunlight in order to function properly, in order for the circadian rhythms and stuff like this. But nevertheless, I mean, in New York, for example, the light situation is kind of, well, not optimal. Because there are so many skyscrapers, then the light doesn't come down. But nevertheless, I mean, this is basically the final conclusion I want to draw. Most of the space on Earth is completely empty. It's just like an atom, for example. An atom basically exists out of nothing, but only a few things. And it's basically the same with humans in any country on this Earth. I mean, there are countries which are higher populated, I guess, but let's just take a look at the US. The US is also completely empty, I guess. There are basically the coastlines, and then you have a few cities in between. These are like 300 million people. It's like not very much. It's like, if you take a look, if you zoom out on Google Maps, it's like us being the ants and just running around, but nobody cares. Yeah, well, that's the final conclusion, I guess.